I'm Dr. Donna Jackson. Donna is fine if you want to ask questions. I'm not at all formal, as you'll probably discover. I'm a senior lecturer in American history at the University of Chester. I've shared a screen. There's nothing on the slides that are coming up that I'm not going to say. So, you know, if you've got a small screen or anything like that, or they're difficult to see, it's not a problem. Everything is I will say out loud, but it's just there's some quite complicated quotes, some quite long quotations, and sometimes it's nice to actually see them. So that's why they are there. Also, apologies, you will see me glancing down at notes. I'm not going to read them like a script, but there are quite a lot of important details here, and I know you're quite a bright lot, so I've got to get it right. So I might be glancing down. If you have questions, I know there's going to be time at the end for Q&A, but if there is a question, if I've said something that didn't make sense and, you know, you need to ask the question as I'm going along, it's fine to do that. I think Sue's going to moderate them and then interrupt me or hold the questions as appropriate. But please do ask questions. You know, this is about speaking out. So speak out. We are nearing the anniversary of the George Floyd murder. Of course, the policeman who did it has now been convicted of murder. This was a seminal moment in American history, but I think also in international thought and making us all stop and consider what was important, what should be included in our society. The George Floyd murder sparked re-energized the Black Lives Matter movement. It had been there before the murder, but it certainly sparked into life, and it spread to this country. You know, we all watched the Edward Colston statue being toppled. National Trust came out with reports thinking or being a bit more honest maybe about the history of slavery and colonialism related to National Trust properties. Lots of discussions going on about this kind of thing, whether this should be included, whether it should be ignored. So sorry, it's hay fever. So sorry. And this all relates to freedom of speech. So this is what sort of prompted my talk today. Now, not everyone is happy with things like the National Trust providing more information. And the terms have risen, mostly in America, but I think it's coming here, cancel culture. Now, this is something should be cancelled or excluded from culture, from our society, that it is not relevant to our society. And there is a point that cancel culture takes away something, you know, takes away something valuable. Should we cancel things from our culture? So this is when freedom of speech, which seems like quite an easy thing to many people, gets a bit more complicated. People are arguing that cancel culture is bad. It's about censorship. It's taking something away. Now, this is not a new idea. An example, banning books. That is censorship. That is cancel culture, if you like. First book, and I may be wrong about this, but the research I did, first book banned in the UK was by John Milton, and I always struggle to pronounce this, and I bet I'm doing it wrong. Areopagitica, and I'm sure somebody will tell me how to pronounce that properly later. Banned in 1644 for political reasons. Second book, Thomas Paine, Rights of Man, banned in 1792, again for political reasons. I don't think political correctness is something new either there. So this is where I think freedom of speech gets kind of interesting. Censorship is just another way of saying no freedom of speech. They are connected. I'm an American specialist. I'm going to use American examples, but a lot of themes do translate to our society. On the slide is a photograph of the US Supreme Court. I took it, no need for copyright worries here. The Supreme Court is there to ensure that American citizens keep the rights that the Constitution gives them. The Constitution is there, actually, in theory, to protect the rights of the American people. It's to prevent government being too tyrannical, too despotic. It's basically, they thought the British, they thought us, our king was really, really mean and bad and tyrannical. The constitutional system was there to prevent that. Any American government was not going to be like that. The Supreme Court was there to preserve rights. So when we come to freedom of speech issues, it's the Supreme Court that ultimately has the say. Is this acceptable activity by government, by society, or not? So that's sort of the context. You will hear a lot about US Supreme Court cases. And of course, they start with the First Amendment to the Constitution. The Constitution was written. It was instantly amended with the Bill of Rights. And it was amended because people were concerned, Thomas Jefferson, one of the leading figures here, that the Constitution as written didn't protect the people enough. So the Bill of Rights was there, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, to ensure that the people's rights were protected, that their freedoms, their liberties, this is what the American Revolution was fought for, their liberties were protected. This may be a little bit sad to admit, but I actually have a favourite amendment. There are 27 amendments. I've got a favourite. It's the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. There are actually quite a few freedoms in there. I'm talking today about freedom of speech. Happy to come back another day next year maybe and talk about other ones or other parts of the Bill of Rights. But here we are focusing on freedom of speech, not freedom of the press, because that's too much for one morning. And also the right of the people to petition for a redress of grievances. That's what we're focusing on today. This, as I said a minute ago, also includes symbolic speech. The Supreme Court confirmed this in the case of Stromberg versus California in 1931. A case was actually about the right to fly a red flag. This is the basis that we are starting from. Now, one of the things is that freedom of speech has never been an absolute freedom. It's always been a freedom that is qualified. In other words, there are some restrictions accepted or allowed to it. Now, particularly during wartime, this freedom of speech, has been curtailed. Other times as well, but wartime is a key one. And you can argue for good reasons. Now, in the First World War, the United States enacted the Espionage Acts of 1917 and 1918, and they made it a crime to commit espionage, to spy. Fair enough. But they also made it a crime to advocate subversive doctrines or to take part in any kind of subversive activity. And the idea there was it was anything that might hamper the war effort. America joined the war, First World War, obviously a bit late, 1917, but once it was in, it wanted to do it right. The Americans are quite... incidentally, I'm half American, so if I say anti-American things, I'm allowed, it's me. So I should have mentioned that to start with. So anything that might hamper the war effort, America was going to do this and was going to commit to it. So under this heading of things that were restricted were things like trying to stop the draft. America instituted a draft. Anything that might stop that and also might discourage people from enlisting, from volunteering. An amendment to the Espionage Act in 1918 prohibited, and I'm going to read this, the uttering, printing, writing, or publishing any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language. That was all made a crime. But of course, the definition here is open to interpretation. What is scurrilous? What is abusive? What is disloyal? So, 1919, we reached the case of Schenck versus United States. Now, 2,000 people were prosecuted and convicted for violating the Espionage Act. Charles Schenck was one of these people. His crime was sending out pamphlets urging people to resist the draft. That's all he did. He appealed his conviction. He cited his First Amendment rights. In speaking out against the draft, he said he was just, he had the freedom to do that under the First Amendment. And the case reached the Supreme Court. The court unanimously, all 9 of them, upheld Schenk's conviction. They said what he had done was not protected by the First Amendment. It was illegal. The man who delivered the opinion of the court, incidentally, Supreme Court rulings are called opinions. Don't know why. Well, no, actually, I do know why. So that was a bit, yes, disingenuous of me. It's because they can be changed. If it was a ruling, it implies it is set in stone. An opinion means it can change, and they do change, as we'll see. So the opinion of the court was delivered by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. He shows up quite a lot this morning. He said free speech was not an unqualified right. It had its limitations. What he said was this: the question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. It is a question of proximity and degree. When a nation is at war, many things that might be said in time of peace are such a hindrance to its effort that their utterance will not be endured so long as men fight, and no court could regard them as protected by any constitutional right. So you cannot say things or publish things if they constitute a clear and present danger to the national security of the United States or to the people. Now, the example Holmes gave later on in his talk was, you cannot shout fire in a crowded theatre. I am assuming here he meant just for fun, because if there is a real fire, it's probably a good idea to tell people. But he's talking about doing it for fun. You know, the theatre's crowded. You think it would be fun to yell fire just to see what happens. There is a stampede. People are hurt, maybe killed. That is not okay. You do not have the freedom to create that danger. So that was Holmes's point. And you know, you can kind of make a sense to it. But there's a problem. What exactly is a clear and present danger, and who decides? This is where this starts getting a bit more complicated. So we can probably all agree on certain dangers. Yelling fire just for fun in a crowded area, not a good idea. But then it gets harder. Can an idea constitute a clear and present danger? Can an opinion constitute a clear and present danger? Well, the Supreme Court has said yes, it can. Notably, in a case we're going to talk about next, the case of Dennis versus United States. Now, in 1940, in response to many things, including the rise of fascism, war in Europe, Congress passed the Alien Registration Act, more commonly known as the Smith Act. This made it a crime to knowingly or willfully advocate, abet, advise, or teach the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety, of overthrowing the government of the United States or of any state by force or violence, or for anyone to organize any association which teaches, advises, or encourages such an overthrow, or for anyone to become a member of or to affiliate with any such association. Now, at the time, this didn't get much attention. And looking at those words, obviously, if you take it to the extreme, then clearly you can see, well, yeah, you know, this is not a good idea. But the ors in there make a difference. One of them is teaching the desirability of overthrowing. It's not saying we are going to overthrow the government. It's saying sometimes maybe it's a good idea. Bear in mind, of course, the United States was founded by a group of people who overthrew the government by force or violence in the American Revolution. So, you know, sometimes it's okay. At the time, this didn't get a lot of attention. Soviet Union changed sides in World War II. America joined World War II. Everybody had more important things to worry about. But after the war, the United States descended into the madness, really, of McCarthyism. Extreme hysteria about the danger of communism. It's sometimes called paranoia. I don't think it is, because I think there is a basis for the fear. It's not an unreasonable fear. But certainly it was It was certainly hysterical. They took it further than they should. 1948, a man called Eugene Dennis and 10 of his fellow, his team, if you like, were convicted of violating the Smith Act. They were indicted on 2 counts. Can't remember if we should have another slide. Let's have another slide. They're indicted. Now I'm going to go back to the previous one. They're indicted on 2 counts. One was conspiring to organize an assembly of persons to teach and advocate the overthrow and destruction of the government of the United States. In other words, they were convicting of gathering a group of people. Second indictment, advocating and teaching the duty and necessity of overthrowing the government by force and violence. So second indictment to teach. They were never indicted of actually doing anything to overthrow the government. They were never indicted of any activity. They were convicted of teaching and discussing. And they were teaching and indicted for doing it in a group. So, if you like, they were convicted of forming a new political party. Now, they appealed the conviction. The conviction ended up at the Supreme Court in the case of Dennis versus United States in 1951. The court ruled by a majority of 6-2 that the Smith Act did not violate the First Amendment, and these convictions were perfectly okay. These men did not have the right, the freedom of speech, to organize this group. Chief Justice Fred Vinson delivered the opinion of the court, and he said this: their conspiracy to organize the Communist Party and to teach and advocate the overthrow of the government of the United States by force and violence created a clear and present danger. He went on and then concluded, overthrow of the government by force and violence is certainly a substantial enough interest for the government to limit speech. Now, the basic premise here was that the Communist Party in itself was not an ordinary political party. It was dangerous in itself. So the court was issuing its opinion on the threat posed by the Communist Party. Justice Felix Frankfurter wrote a concurring opinion, and he said this: the Communist Party was not designed by these defendants as an ordinary political party. The party rejects the basic premise of our political system. That change is to be brought about by non-violent constitutional process. Instead, the party advocates the theory that there is a duty and necessity to overthrow the government by force and violence. He's saying the force and violence thing is enough in itself to make this dangerous. Not everybody agreed. Justice Douglas was one of the 2 justices who dissented. He said the Communist Party could never pose a serious threat. He wrote this: communists in this country have never made a respectable or serious showing in any election. Communism in the world scene is no bogeyman, but communism as a political faction or party in this country plainly is. Free speech has destroyed it as an effective political party. Douglas actually went further than this. He said that teaching an idea could never constitute a clear and present danger. Ideas in themselves are not dangerous. He said students were not blank slates. They could make up their own mind. You shouldn't assume, this was not indoctrination. This was education. And he said teaching about communism, done effectively, could undermine the support for it. He said this: if, and he's talking about the books that put forward communist theory, if they are understood, the ugliness of communism is revealed. Its deceit and cunning are exposed. The nature of its activities become apparent, and the chances of its success less likely. Justice Frankfurter, who had agreed that Dennis should be convicted, but he had a little bit of a reservation. And he wrote a separate opinion, which justices are allowed to do. And he did agree with Douglas about this idea of, freedom of thought, as we'll see. He said this: Liberty of thought soon shrivels without freedom of expression. Without open minds, there can be no open society. And if society be not open, the spirit of man is mutilated and becomes enslaved. So this leads us to another principle when we are talking about freedom of speech. And that is the free marketplace of ideas. And to talk about this, I'm going to take us back to the time of the Schenck decision. So we're going to go back to 1919. Shortly after the Supreme Court reached its decision in Schenck versus United States, it heard the case of Abrams versus United States. Now, Jacob Abrams was also convicted of violating the Espionage Act. Now, this act, remember, had made it illegal to do anything subversive, also illegal to criticize the government. Let's not give anybody any ideas, hey? But this act had made it illegal. Incidentally, the court rules this is a bad idea much later on. Jacob Abrams had distributed some pamphlets that criticized Woodrow Wilson and his decision, he was the president at the time, his decision to send American troops to fight on the side of the White Russians in the Russian Civil War that was going on at this point. He was indicted under the Espionage Act. Jacob Abrams, not Woodrow Wilson. Abrams was indicted, convicted of causing unrest, encouraging resistance to the war, hampering the war effort. He appealed to the Supreme Court. The court upheld his conviction by 7-2. The court cited the clear and present danger doctrine that had been established in the case of Schenck. The doctrine, of course, written by Oliver Wendell Holmes. One of the reasons we're talking about this case now, though, is because of the role played in this case by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Now, he created the clear and present danger doctrine, but he changed his mind because he realized quite quickly how it could be misused. He wrote a dissent in the case of Abrams versus United States that has gone down in history as is seen as one of the greatest defenses of free speech. This is the basis that one would hope that these decisions are, well, I would hope, rest on. Holmes argued that democracy rests on a free marketplace of ideas. This is where this was first talked about in the United States, not where it's first talked about altogether. We'll come to that in a second. Free marketplace idea, a free exchange of ideas, open discussion is what he's talking about. Now, he said ideas might be unpopular, they might be controversial, unsettling, they might be plain wrong, they might be lies. But he said all ideas had an equal right to be heard. He said if this happened, the good ideas would crowd out the bad ideas. It's only, if you think about banning records, how do you get a record in the old day when there were proper records? How do you get it to number one? You ban it. But if you allow them all to play, people go, oh, rubbish record, not buying that. That is what he's talking about. And he said this: the ultimate good desired is better reached by free trade in ideas. That the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market, and that truth is the only ground upon which their wishes safely can be carried out. Free trade in ideas. He was not the first to do this. It echoes through history. I could have found example after example after example, but we probably want our dinner at some point. So I picked three. The first, John Milton, back to the word I struggle with, Areopagitica, probably pronounced wrong again, addressed to Parliament back in 1644. Rather ironically, this thing, arguing for free trade of ideas, was banned. But he said this. Oops. We'll get to Thomas Jefferson in a minute. He said this, and I didn't put it on the slide. And though all the winds of doctrine were let loose to play upon the earth, so truth be in the field. We do injuriously by licensing and prohibiting to misdoubt. We do injuriously by licensing and prohibiting to misdoubt her strength. I read that really badly. I'm going to read it again. And though all the winds of doctrine were let loose upon the earth, so truth be in the field, we do injuriously by licensing and prohibiting to misdoubt her strength. We do it injuriously. That's where the stress should have been. Let her and falsehood grapple. Whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter. Her confuting is the best and surest suppression. In other words, in a free and open encounter, truth will always come out on top. And I've just proved how bad I am at reading 17th century pamphlets. Luckily, we're moving on to the 19th century. Oh, we're still in, 18th century. No, just in the 19th century. Thomas Jefferson, one of the people I quite like in history. He has his faults, of course, but on the whole, pretty good guy. He made a similar argument in his first inaugural address, 1801. Now, this is a really interesting election. It's the first time there was a peaceful transfer of power from one faction to another. It's when it was proven democracy could work. And he said this is because of the free marketplace of ideas. He said this: let us reflect that having banished from our land that religious intolerance under which mankind so long bled and suffered, we have yet gained little if we countenance a political intolerance as despotic, as wicked, and capable of as bitter and bloody persecutions. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. They were the names of the two political parties at the time. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union or to change its republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety net with which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it. Fancy language again, but it's the same principle, free marketplace of ideas. John Stuart Mill, moving to the 19th century, in Liberty, published in 1859, chapter 2 was devoted to it's called the liberty of thought and discussion. He said this: the peculiar evil of silencing the expression of opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. Holmes drew on all of these ideas in his dissent. They may not have persuaded his fellow justices in the Abrams case, but this rhetoric was powerful. It has lived on, gone down in history. And this is why a seemingly simple principle is actually quite complicated. So yes, we support freedom of speech. I'm hoping we do anyway. Yes, we probably all agree that there should be this clear and present danger qualification. Yes, we agree that in the principle of a free marketplace, ideas. But, this is the but, balancing these three things often means walking quite a fine line, especially when it comes to things like hate speech. Is that a clear and present danger? Should it be allowed to compete in this free marketplace of ideas? And I'm going to argue, or I'm going to state my opinion, that yeah, it should be. This is where it gets hard. So, some examples, again, from the US Supreme Court. First of these, 1969, the case of Brandenburg versus Ohio reached the Supreme Court. This is often considered a landmark ruling in this debate between hate speech and freedom of speech. Case relates to the Ku Klux Klan, began with a Klan rally near Cincinnati. About a dozen members of the Klan dressed in the traditional, what had become traditional white robes, hoods, some armed with guns, Second Amendment, whole different thing. We could talk about that another day as well. They burned a cross in an open field. The leader of the group, a man called Clarence Brandenburg, then gave a quite hate-filled speech anti-Black, anti-Semitic, filled with hate, filled with racism, intolerance. He called for the, sorry, this is quite uncomfortable to hear, this is what he did, called for the expulsion of all African Americans, all Jews from the United States, said they tainted it. He said the Klan would result to violent action if America was not saved. Some of this may be echoing with recent events. He was arrested, he was convicted for breaking the law in Ohio and sent to prison. He appealed, citing his First Amendment right. This was his opinion. The case went to Supreme Court. Unanimously, the court ruled that the conviction should be overturned. They said that states had no authority to forbid or prescribe advocacy except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. So in doing this, the court was drawing a distinction between hate speech and hate crimes. Hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. People have the right to state these opinions. Hate crimes clearly are not allowed. They're illegal. If you think that the hateful speech inspired a hate crime, the person can be convicted of that crime, but the burden of proof for this connection lies with the prosecution. In other words, it is up to the prosecution to prove that this particular speech incited this particular crime. You cannot assume it did. If you're thinking about January 6th this year, excellent. This was the basis of some of Trump's defense, that his speech had nothing to do with the attack on the US Capitol. It is down to the prosecution to prove it did. Prosecutions in the assault on the Capitol are still going on. It'll be interesting to see how much this comes up. But that is the basis of the defense, if you like. He made a speech. It was horrible. For some of us, we thought it was horrible. There was then a criminal act, but were they connected? Most recent hate speech ruling came in 2017 from the Supreme Court, the case of Mattel versus Tam. This confirmed that there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. This is quite an interesting case. And I thought about putting this in or not, but I've kept it for a reason. Simon Tam applied for a trademark for his group, which was called the Slants. And it was denied. His request for a trademark was denied because slants was seen as a derogatory term for Asian Americans, related to derogatory way of referring to what the eyes looked like, and it was offensive. Simon Tam, incidentally, is Asian American, so it's why he chose the name. He'd sort of reappropriated the language. So that's why he appealed. Case reached the Supreme Court. Justice Samuel Alito delivered the unanimous opinion of the court. These are a little bit small, I'm afraid. He said this: the idea that the government may restrict speech expressing ideas that offend strikes at the heart of the First Amendment. Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other similar ground is hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate. The freedom to express, that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate. Anthony Kennedy, wrote a concurring opinion. He said this: a law found to discriminate based on viewpoint is an egregious form of content discrimination, which is presumptively unconstitutional. A law that can be directed against speech found offensive to some portion of the public can be turned against minority and dissenting views to the detriment of all. The First Amendment does not entrust that power to the government's benevolence. Instead, our reliance must be on the substantial safeguards of free and open discussion in a democratic society. That's a quote that I mentioned twice, and the idea is there: the freedom to express the thought, protect the freedom we express the thought to hate. They are quotations all from Oliver Wendell Holmes. His ideas are echoing into the 21st century. And both men, of course, are talking about this free exchange of ideas, the free marketplace of ideas. Symbolic speech, expressing symbolic speech. But back to the Klan, cross burning. 2003 case of Virginia versus Black reached the Supreme Court. This was actually two cases, but as the court often does, if the principle of the case is the same, they amalgamate them and just issue one opinion. These were about convictions where people had, or Klan members had been convicted of burning crosses. One case, Richard Elliott, Jonathan O'Meara had been convicted of putting up a cross on their neighbor's lawn and burning it. Their neighbor was African American. Second case, Barry Black, he was the named plaintiff here. He held a rally on private property with the permission of that owner, and during this, a cross was lit on fire. Court issued its ruling 8-1. The court overturned both convictions. What had happened, they said, was okay. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, incidentally the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court, bit of trivia, delivered the opinion of the court. Basically, she said that Virginia could that Virginia could pass a law restricting speech in the form of cross burning, but they could only do so if they could prove, that the prosecution could prove, that the intent of the cross burning was intimidation. Here we're going back to that imminent lawless action kind of thing. One could not assume that all cross burnings were there to intimidate. They might be, but they might not be. So you cannot ban cross burning. What you can do is make the crime, the intimidation, a crime, if you like. But the cross burning in itself is not a crime. She said this: while a burning cross does not inevitably convey a message of intimidation, often the cross burner intends that the recipients of the message fear for their lives. And when a cross burning is used to intimidate, few, if any, messages are more powerful. And then there's a little bit more in the opinion, and then she went on to say this: it may be true that a cross burning, even at a political rally, arouses a sense of anger or hatred among the vast majority of citizens who see a burning cross. But this sense of anger or hatred is not sufficient to ban all cross burnings. It is you have to prove somebody was intimidated by this, and the burden of proof rests with the prosecution. Just the cross burning itself is covered by the First Amendment in the expression of an idea. So unless there is intimidation, unless there is a hate crime, it is okay. That's what the court was saying in this case. Let's talk about the Nazis. So I did say to Sue at the start, there's some quite controversial stuff coming up. If we're going to go for it, let's go for it. The Nazis, neo-Nazis, alt-right, whatever you want to call them, very much in the news in the United States, also under various guises here in this country as well. Very visible, of course, in the United States on January 6th. And since Trump came to office in 2016, a lot of coverage in 2017 about flags, particularly one in North Carolina that went viral, flying a Nazi flag. Another big event was the rally, the rally against racism that held in Charlottesville, Virginia, where one of the neo-Nazis drove a car into the crowd with the intent of hurting people. Heather Heyer, of course, was killed in that act. So this is a current issue. This is very contemporary and serious. Where does the Supreme Court stand when it comes to Nazis, neo-Nazis, alt-right? You're probably guessing where I'm going with this, because the court is saying it's okay. In the free marketplace of ideas, these ideas are also protected. This was established, oh, clicked a little bit too early there, in the case of the National Socialist Party of America versus Village of Skokie in 1977. It's sometimes called the Skokie Affair. Case started when a man called Frank Collin, who was the leader of the National Socialist Party of America, announced that they were going to hold a march through Skokie, Illinois, dressed in full Nazi uniforms, flying the flags, expressing their opinion. That, for most of us, many of us, perhaps all of us, is uncomfortable enough. It gets worse for me when you know that Skokie was a Jewish neighborhood. At that point, so predominantly Jewish neighborhood, Holocaust survivors were there. 1 in 6 residents of Skokie was a survivor of the Holocaust. So, you know, this march, which was offensive to many people, sorry, just took the microphone, in my view, suddenly reaches a whole other level of being just utterly abhorrent. The residents obtained an injunction to stop the march. Collin appealed, and the injunction was overturned. The case reached the Supreme Court, issued its ruling June 14th, 1977. The court held that the group's request to engage in a parade or demonstration involving public display of the Nazi swastika was a symbolic form of free speech, was protected by the First Amendment. The march didn't actually take place. Thank goodness, it didn't take place in that area. The group did get rights to hold a march elsewhere in Chicago, and the marches still went on, but it didn't take place in Skokie, which I am personally glad about. What makes this case quite interesting is that Collin and his group, the Nazi group, were defended by the American Civil Liberties Union. Now, the ACLU is there to protect freedom, to protect minority rights. It stands against racism. It stands for many of those, I think, great values. It defended the Nazis, and it considered it one of the great things it's ever done. It says this in, if you look at the website of the ACLU, it talks about its history, the cases it's undertaken, why it's done it. And it says this: one of the most noted moments in the ACLU's history occurred in 1978, when the ACLU defended a Nazi group that wanted to march through the Chicago suburb of Skokie, Illinois, where many Holocaust survivors lived. The ACLU persuaded a federal court to strike down 3 ordinances that placed significant restrictions on the Nazis' First Amendment right to march and express their views. The decision to take the case was a demonstration of the ACLU's commitment to the principle that constitutional rights must apply to even the most unpopular groups if they're going to be preserved for everyone. Many now consider this one of the ACLU's finest hours. What they're saying is there is a line, but that line needs to err on the side of caution. It is better to allow to support the free marketplace of ideas, allow the bad ideas to be there, if the alternative is to risk good ideas, to risk freedom of expression. That is what the ACLU was saying. Nearly done. Just want to talk about Take a Knee, because this is something that is very current, happening in this country, and this is symbolic speech. It seems like quite an innocuous thing, just kneeling quietly, peacefully for a few moments. It has aroused huge controversy, more so in the United States than here, but even here as well. Colin Kaepernick was the first man to do this in the NFL. He was an NFL quarterback for the 49ers. First took a knee in 2016. He lost his job. He's received death threats. It was seen as horrendous. But this form of symbolic speech, of expressing an idea, has spread. Spread to Formula One. Lewis Hamilton has been one of the leading figures there. He's received quite a lot of hate for it, some of which from fellow, did I just say that fellow? I'm not sure I said Formula One, but fellow Formula One drivers. You all knew what I meant. And in an interview, March 25th, 2021, so very, very recently, he said this: I plan to continue to take the knee because I think what's really important is when young children are watching what we're doing here in this sport. And when they see us take the knee, they will sit and ask their parents or their teachers, why are they doing that? What are they taking the knee for? It sparks an uncomfortable conversation. It means parents have to educate themselves, and the kids are getting educated. It's a fight that's not won. It's a fight that will continue on for a long time, I'm sure. But I definitely think we're in a good time where, I can't read the end of it, where conversation is healthy. This is about talking, expressing ideas, free marketplace of ideas. Happening in football as well. Certainly in the Premier League, but England matches, they've just announced that the England players will take the knee for the next 3 matches, I think, in qualifiers. 2019, it started. Premier League players began, and EFL players, to take a knee before every match. There were discussions about how long this should continue. Maybe they'd made a point just before Christmas, I think. The players not unanimously, overwhelming majority said, no, we need to continue. Racism is still there. We need to express our opinion on racism through this symbolic speech action. In December, Harry Kane, England manager, was interviewed by BBC Radio 5, and he said this: I hear people ask if we should still be doing it, and we should. We are watched by millions of people around the world. I don't like it when people say we should just play football and stick to kicking a ball, because we have a huge platform. We come across to millions around the world. Our voices should be heard. All we want to do is help the world to be a better place. The only way to do that is to stick together, to voice your opinion and try to help make that change. So, in conclusion, freedom of speech is not easy. Aaron Sorkin, he's actually a film producer, scriptwriter. Did the West Wing TV series, if you saw that back in the day, one of my favourites. He said this, or actually one of his characters said this in a film called The American President. You want free speech? Let's see you acknowledge a man whose words make your blood boil, who's standing centre stage and advocating at the top of his lungs that which you would spend a lifetime opposing at the top of yours. If you stand for free speech, that is what you have to do. And I do advocate that. I do get why Nazis are allowed to march, why racists are allowed to speak out, but it's because I trust in the free marketplace of ideas. I have to. That rather than risk limiting what people can say, we have to let everybody speak and trust that the good ideas will outweigh the bad, that people will learn. Now, I've already done it, but I would be bereft. I couldn't not go back to Star Wars. To quote Obi-Wan Kenobi, many of the truths that we cling to depend on our point of view. This is why education is so important, especially when it comes to hatred or intolerance, why we need to do it. At Chester recently, I don't think I'm breaking any confidences by saying this. I mean, it's not like this is recorded or anything. But every member of staff at Chester has just had to undertake, or is undertaking, a race awareness course to get us to think about how actions might be perceived, or how they might affect people of colour, other minorities. I've taken the course. It's a good thing. We need to be more aware. I talked about cancel culture right at the start. This really, those who shout about it are saying that cancelling something means that we've lost something vital to our society or culture. I would argue there are some things that we need to lose from our culture. Racism does not add to our culture, our society. Discrimination does not add value. We should want to lose them, but they have to be lost through discussion, education, acceptance. I'm hoping in this free marketplace we'll reach the point where nobody wants to say anything offensive. Not particularly a fan of Harry Kane, I will admit, but I do agree here. You know, the only way to change the world, voice your opinion, make that change. So we do need freedom of speech. Speak out is what I'm saying. Luke Skywalker said to Jabba the Hutt, Return of the Jedi, the film I'm up to actually in my marathon, I must be allowed to speak. Speak out. Try to make the world, try to make the universe even a better place. And in doing that, may the force be with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. Can people put their questions into the text box? I have one kind of observation. Yeah, one man's truth is another man's opinion. What about when people stand up and tell demonstrable lies?
Then you speak out with the evidence to show they are lying. You engage in civilized debate, and you trust eventually that gets through. Obviously, I mean, the big debate about the vaccine is a current one. You know, the lies that are being spread, the misunderstandings that are being spread. And all we can do, I think, is go back to the science and go, look at the statistics, look at the evidence. There will be some people who refuse to understand, but we have to kind of, I personally have to trust in the greater good, that eventually the weight of evidence will win out.
You hope. Yes, we all hope. I'm sure we all hope. Yes. Okay. There's also the culture of truth versus loyalty, where we apparently swallow lies, and it's to do with loyalty. And I think that kind of encapsulated the Trump government, didn't it? Yeah.
And I mean, that's down to leadership and good leadership, obviously, I think, sorry, keep hitting the microphone, that's probably just deafening everybody, is about encouraging this expression, this exchange of ideas. There are bad leaders. Trump's tactics were recognized by the majority of people. If you look at the statistics and the demographics, the Republicans should not have lost everything in the 2020 election. They should not certainly have lost the Senate, but they did. Presidency was really not, it was theirs for the losing, and they lost it. So I think that failure of leadership was recognized, and it was recognized because the other side were speaking out and showing it. Stacey Abrams in Georgia is just a hero, but she did it through education, through presenting evidence and facts. And the bad leadership, excuse me, that's my opinion expressing my thing, or was again, free marketplace of ideas was drowned out.
Okay, we have a question from Ian Cross that says, in a market, the mechanism that achieves rational outcomes is supposed to be the price mechanism. What is it in the marketplace of ideas that guarantees that truth wins out?
I would say it's education. It's about encouraging people to think, to challenge, to question, to understand. One of the things about university education, this was when I was a student way back, one of the things we were told, there were polytechnics back then, and this is a bit mean to polytechnics, it is very mean, but it maybe a better comparison is school to university. One is about teaching you what to think. You learn information. The other, the next step up, is about teaching you how to think. So it's certainly what I do. I teach this kind of stuff. This is one of my classes you just kind of had, or a bit of one of my classes. It's about encouraging people to challenge and question. So it's about education. It's about critical thinking. That is what you need. We need an educated society. It's why education is so important. It's why it shouldn't just be for the elites. It shouldn't be priced out of reach. You know, critical thinking is key. And some schools do it. I'm not saying all schools don't do it, but this is, if you like, that is the mechanism for making this work.
Okay, from Andy Sawyer, a free market of ideas. Is there such a thing as a free market? Markets are, of course, owned and controlled, or is this simply an idealistic concept?
Well, markets are owned and controlled, and the marketplace of idea is controlled. Again, I'm going to have to go back to the United States by the Supreme Court, and ultimately it has come down on the side of expression of opinion, that it isn't dominated, there isn't indoctrination, if you like. I'm not sure we have anything similar in this country. Maybe we should, maybe we do. My British politics is not as good as my American politics. But yeah, there always has to be somebody deciding what is okay and what is not. What the Supreme Court has done in America is erred on the side of caution. If we're not sure if this is a danger or not, we're going to assume it isn't, and trust in the marketplace. Trust in the people, if you like, to decide what is okay and what is not.
Okay. And from Stuart Murray, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effectively do you think the free market of ideas is working? Ooh, mean questions, Stuart.
Yeah, no, that's fine. They're good questions. I like these. I think it is, because 2 years ago, our football players were not taking a knee and we were not having these conversations. I think maybe we're on a 7, maybe an 8, but we are now, when it comes to race, we are having those conversations. We are looking at what we do, how we present information. I'm not saying statues should be torn down, although I think some of them should. I think they should be moved, the ones that are torn down, but it is about the education. Why do we have, I'm going to be really controversial, a statue of Winston Churchill? Now, I would argue that statue needs to be there because of his role in the Second World War. He was very much colonialist. There were certainly bad things there. But when the statue is put into context, when this is what it's there for, this is why I think we're winning out. But those conversations about the rest of the story are now happening. And that, I think, is why I would go with a 7 and 8. We're certainly not a 10 yet, but I think we're getting there.
Okay. From Liz Thackeray, is there any such thing as truth in the post-truth era? Tricky.
Yeah, it's a good question. And then we're getting into philosophy, and I'm not a philosopher. Truth and fact. I know in history we teach there are no such thing as historical facts. It is about interpretation and extrapolation. I think it's maybe values is a better word, not necessarily truths, because I think you're absolutely right, but values. What as a society do we stand for? What do we represent? The freedom of speech and ideas. This isn't just about Return of the Jedi is a better film than The Empire Strikes Back. That's an opinion. I can be totally great friends with somebody who would say the other way. Most of my friends do, actually. But there are some things. So that's not really a value. That's an opinion. But values such as a society, do we endorse racism? That is a value where I think this freedom of speech, this free marketplace, this expression of idea, this education is so important. So if you like values rather than truth, I think it's a great question. Much better way of putting things.
I think there's a comment on this by Jeff Howard, not really a question, but it says the free market of ideas relies on the assumption that truth is a regulative idea. Although this is possibly true in maths and science, although we've still got flat earthers, many postmodernists would see truth as socially constructed. We do not converge on anything objective, but a mere convergence of opinion. Yeah.
So perhaps back to values. And what I personally am advocating now as great values, anti-racist, maybe in 50 years we will have moved on and we've gone, actually, I'm not saying we would go back to being racist, but there are things now in our society today that we accept that maybe in 50 years we're going to go, oh, actually, people of 50 years ago, it was different. So I actually, in history, there's things about why do we teach about Winston Churchill? Because he did some pretty nasty stuff. Because he did other stuff. And at the time he was doing what now might be deemed pretty nasty stuff for his generation, for that society, it was considered acceptable. We have to judge, as historians, we have to judge both in our own context, but in the context of the time, and not saying that would be acceptable today, but saying at the time we have to understand what's happened. I've noticed on TV programs now, there's very often you get a little thing at the start. There was a TV series on Churchill I've just watched. This includes historically that is the exact word, but something like historically appropriate language or something like that, that as a society today, we would not accept that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. From Don McIntyre. The American Humanist Association has recently cancelled Richard Dawkins on the grounds of transphobia. Do you approve?
No, because let the man speak and be shown, this is my opinion, how stupid he is. Cancelling him makes him attractive to those people who are resistant to education, who want to believe in something that's discriminatory. So J.K. Rowling, I think, was tried to be cancelled in this country because of her related to transphobia comments. Let them be seen. Does that affect what her books have added to education? I don't think it does. Doesn't mean as a person I would want to go to dinner with her, but I could still recognize some value. I think cancelling things doesn't help. It can make, rather than the bad ideas being drowned out in this open discussion, it can make them more attractive, like banning a record. Straight to number one.
Yeah. Okay. And I think this is the final question, but a second one from Andy Sawyer. If someone argues that their symbolic speech should be part of freedom of speech, and someone else says they've been intimidated by, e.g., the Nazi flag waving, who wins out?
Well, in this concept, my little idealistic society that I've created, the burden of proof rests on the person to prove that they were intimidated. If they can prove that, then it is no longer symbolic speech. It is a hate crime and they should be prosecuted. But sharing the idea in itself, I would argue, is okay. Now, I mean, this is why this is my favorite amendment, and it's why this is so hard. I hate racism. I am quite proud. I speak out quite a lot on Twitter. I did quite a lot of radio on Black Lives Matter. I've got so much abusive tweets and hate speech, and the university actually had to kind of protect me at one point and filter stuff because it was so nasty. I knew I was doing something right. I'm quite proud of that. I angered the racists. Yeah, I'm so proud. I hate it. But in allowing people to express those ideas, I think they prove their ignorance, if you like. So I am absolutely for allowing the idea I hate to be voiced, and we should. And I think I do trust in society, I do trust in people, and I trust in education. Obviously, I'm an educator. I think ultimately things do get better. And I think the current thing about race, we are having these conversations. We weren't having them 2 or 3 years ago, but we are. There is progress. It's slow. It's not fast enough, but there is progress.
I think, well, that's all the questions for now. I think there was one quote that I kind of expected to see in your talk that wasn't there. And it was about, I can't remember who did it. And it's about I disagree with you entirely, but I will defend until death your right to say. Who was that?
It's attributed to Voltaire, but I don't think anyone's actually found the thing. I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
Yeah.
And that's me. That is absolutely what I would argue.
Okay. Oh, one more from Ian Cross. Why should society not be able to protect itself against threatening or abusive words which incite racial hatred?
If they incite racial hatred and hate crimes, absolutely, there is a right. There is a clear and present danger, but it is that connection. The problem here is, I agree, freedom of speech is a qualified right. It's drawing that line. Where do we draw that line? And I, with the Supreme Court, err on the side of caution. It's better to let one bad idea out than to prevent one good idea being spoken. Remember, there was a time when America, it was a crime to teach an idea. That is where we can go. That is the risk we run. I would rather risk something that is offensive being spoken and trust in society to crowd that out than risk the idea that I could be arrested for the talk I've just given.
Yes. Yeah. On that note, I think this is where we end. Thank you very, very much, Donna.
Pleasure.
It's been a interesting and thought-provoking, and by the number of questions, they were really good questions that we had. I thought well worth doing. All right, and thank you very much. And I'm about to click on end broadcast. So goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.